Hi everyone, thank you for joining us. Today is International Day of Democracy and we have a very special guest. My name is Julie Mellon. I work in the Public Affairs section here at the Embassy in Lusaka, and I'd like to introduce Ruth Kangwa, who is going to have a chat with us today about democracy in honor of the International Day of Democracy. Ruth is a human rights lawyer and a youth and gender activist, and she is founder of the Girls Gone Political movement, in which she's championing increased participation of women in politics. And Ruth, I'd like to hand it over to you to add to that. I know you do a lot more than what I just described, so if you want to tell us a little more about yourself, and then I'll ask you a couple of questions.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me here, first of all. And I think basically what I'm going to add on is I am a very passionate young citizen of my country, Zambia, and I think I'm ensuring to redefine the voice of young people from my demonstrations through to my passions, and ensuring that young people's voices are heard. So I think I'll end off there and then we dive into it.
Thank you, Ruth. So my first question for you this morning is, what does democracy mean to you?
So democracy to me, firstly, borders around respect, protection, and the inclusiveness of all citizens, irregardless of their race, irregardless of their age, irregardless of their gender or tribe. And more importantly, it is their participation in the affairs of a state. And how I view democracy is that it is also the coexistence of a diverse people, diverse tribes, diverse political parties, with different opinions, but the utmost respect for human rights. And I think that, to me, is democracy.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree with you. And why is it important? I know that the work that you do is around increasing access to democratic processes for young people and for women. Why is it important for young people in particular to participate in the democratic process?
So the first thing I'll start off is by saying, if we do state that democracy is ruled by the people, for the people, of the people, and by the people, it then is only important or imperative that people are part of the decision-making processes in any nation, in any state, in any society. And therefore, for young people, our participation in any democracy ensures that we have active participation, active engagement as citizens, active holding accountability of leaders that we put into places. Mm-hmm. And I think the importance of this is, if young people take part of democratic processes, we ensure that we are upholding the tenets of good governance in any country and any society. And I believe that young people taking part in democratic processes also ensures that we enrich policy making, and to ensure that we are shapers of the decisions that are going to be reflective for us in the future, they're reflective for generations to come, and that we shape whatever is happening in our countries.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense, and it really speaks to what you said about having a diverse range of voices represented in policy making. So what are some of the factors, in your opinion, that can hinder democratic participation, and how can we address some of those factors?
I think from my few years of experience and in activism, I have learned not to, dwell so much on some of the factors, which I'll highlight, is the lack of capacity, the lack of knowledge on civic or political processes or education. And one of the other factors that limits citizens participating, and more especially young people or young women or persons with disabilities, is legal limitations in terms of the laws. I'll give you an example. Right now, our National Assembly has only got 1.8% of young people as a representation, and with the women, we're only at 14.7%. And when you look at such numbers for a population we term as more youthful and more women aligned, we notice that we are shrinking our democratic space because those voices aren't being heard or represented as we'd want them to be represented. And this borders back to some of the factors that limit and hinder the barriers of practicing or participating in democratic spaces. And I think a solution to this, it helps us realize that we need to tackle some of the problems. Like I said, there's lack of knowledge or low literacy levels. And that's why we need to ensure that citizens are well equipped, they are well versed and given quality education that enable them to participate in democratic spaces, regardless of what level they're at. I think I saw a study from the Afrobarometer which stated that in most of our countries in Southern Africa, and even Zambia, the people that participate in democratic spaces are usually people that have attained a tertiary diploma, tertiary degree, and at secondary school level. But what happens to the people that are at primary level or didn't have the access to education but have the knowledge? How do we ensure that we engage even citizens with a lower level of education but have their right and their voice, which needs to be heard?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And actually, this wasn't on the list of questions we discussed, but would you be able to speak a little bit about your organization and what you're doing to kind of address some of those issues? Because I know that you're very engaged in finding ways to increase the representation of young people and of women in spaces like the National Assembly. Yeah.
So actually, our social movements, there are two of them. I belong to Youth for Parliament, where we're still a leader there, and as well as Girls Gone Political, which focuses on young women. But what our movements are currently doing is to ensure that we have meaningful participation and engagement, not just to champion for the increased representation of people there, but increased participation and ensuring that young people that we do put in positions are not just there as tokenism for putting youth or putting women or young people with persons with disabilities, but ensuring that these are young people that are going to champion and be inclusive, to champion for social justice and the agendas that affect people in society. And what we're currently doing, especially for Girls Gone Political, is to ensure that we're not talking about just young women being in the political space, but ensuring that young women are able to have a voice even in the public service. There are a lot of young people that do not want to be perhaps politically inclined, but want to have their political voice heard on the decision-making table. And this is a platform that we want to ensure more young voices are amplified to contribute to some of the issues that are affecting us in our society. And one of the wins I'll definitely tell you is we saw with our past election in 2021, which saw a change of government. Young people were at the center of it. Absolutely. And what our movements did do is we ensured that we had an increased number of young mayors being elected to positions. And I'll give you a few examples. We've got one in Chipata, George Mwanza. He's a success because he had the backing of fellow young people who had a platform to engage and to champion him. There's one lady in Kanchibia, there's Bumba Malambo in Kafue, and all these are now young mayors and council chairpersons, as well as members of parliament. We've now seen the youngest member of parliament from Nalolo, Honorable Imanga Wamunyima, and he is on the floor now, engaging and championing to speak for the rights of young people, the rights of children, the rights of women, and the marginalized, as we are termed. And for us, this is a success because we look at how we were able to engage the grassroots prior to election. We had a lot of campaigns that would say, we started off, I think, 2019, where we said, get out and participate. This is something that we're doing to encourage citizens of Zambia to get out and get involved in some of the processes that were happening, whether it's holding leaders accountable for decisions that they've made, to ensure that there's transparency in democratic processes or in government decisions that are made. And come to 2020, that was just a year before the election, we were asking people to get out and register. This was to ensure that citizens did exercise their democratic right to be in the register book of the ECZ. And when we were getting to 2021, the year of the election, our campaign message was get out and vote. So this was a widespread advocacy campaign to ensure that citizens, and not just young people, even people in their house, everybody. I mean, if parents saw their children getting involved, it motivated them to say, let's all get out and go stand in the queue at 12 o'clock as a family. Exactly. And we found that as a means of engagement and utilizing non-traditional media, which is social media, has been very key to ensure that more citizens of Zambia are engaged in democratic processes and are taught or given civic education snippets of how they can exercise their democratic rights.
Yeah, that's awesome. And so I think you started to answer this question already, but what role do you feel that young people can play in safeguarding democracy, and what support do they need from those who are already in power, from established leaders, in order to do that?
So my point of view, and I think with answering both of the questions, for me, I am of the view that the only way, young people do know what role they need to play. Young people, we need to stop saying that young people aren't involved in these processes. They're using different means, like I said, social media. And how they need to now engage with leaders that are already in places of decision making. There needs to be coexistence and intergenerational dialogue. I think it's something that I emphasize because I realize that we have young people that are very enthusiastic, want to participate. But then we do have older leaders or a system that doesn't trust. So there's mistrust between the relationship of young people, democratic spaces, or systematic spaces, because young people are still thought that they don't have the capacity yet, they don't have the experience, they lack. But I always tell my young people as well as the older leaders that how do we expect young people to be recipients of decisions they do not shape today? So we need to have more collaborations between generations. We're looking at Zambia. Zambia's demographic, Zambia's landscape or environment is that we've got different generations and there's a bit of mistrust. So we need to bridge that gap to ensure that there's intergenerational co-leadership, coexistence, intergenerational dialogue. And that would mean older leaders not just passing on the baton, but older leaders being able to sit with Ruth and say, Ruth, this is how a system operates. Ruth, this is how government protocol, this is how procedures, this is how we table, this is how we dialogue, engage. And I think for me, that is something we can look into as a solution. It's about those that are already there having trust to, I don't want to say take the risk, but having the thought to say, I also need to come down to this level, and young people also not being overzealous to say, get away from your positions, we need to be there. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah, it's a partnership. It's not just, like you said, a passing on.
Exactly. Because I am where I am today because of people's shoulders that was able to stand on that went ahead or before me. So I think that's something that needs to change to ensure that even young people are participating in these democratic spaces.
I think that's a really important point, because when people discuss this topic, you so often hear the responsibility being placed on the young people. You know, why aren't you doing more? How can you get more engaged? But really, it's a shared responsibility.
It is.
The established leaders, those institutions, also need to be willing to work with young people and support them to rise up. So I think that's a really important point. Thank you. What message do you have for young people in Zambia as we commemorate the International Day of Democracy today?
So my message today, on this very important day, on the 15th of September, is this is a day for young Zambians to reflect on the position, the democratic position of our country as it is now, to look at how we can be the hope for a democracy that won't backslide. That's my first point. My second point is to ensure that our country, particularly, and its young people, look at the relationship between youth and democracy. And this is a very important day in which young people need to be reflective of what their responsibility is, to be active citizens. I always tell my young people that power will not be thrust upon you. You need to claim, to own, and demand your spaces, irregardless of what sector you're in. If you're in the civic space, if you're in the energy sector, if you're in the agriculture space, you need to ensure that you carry your own chair. Go to that big table. Be willing to learn, be willing to be teachable, as well as be willing to pass on. And basically, this is a very key and important date, even for those youth activists that have made great strides. I know there are young people that haven't had their voices amplified, but let's look at how we can collaborate and ensure that we have intergenerational coexistence to ensure that we have hope for Zambia's democracy.
Thank you. That's a great message. And you know what? I shouldn't have asked what your message for young people was. Your message for everybody.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Ruth, for joining us today. And thank you to everybody who's been watching along. Please feel free to write your comments in the comment section under the video, and we'll respond to them. And we're very happy to have you here today. And thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of your day. And please take the day, as Ruth said, to reflect on your role in democracy.